The moment Africa whispered enough, they said Africa would always wait. Wait for aid, wait for approval, wait for permission. But one quiet morning in Ouagadougou, two nations decided to stop waiting. No protests, no breaking news banners, just two leaders looking across a table and saying, "Let's build our own system." That moment was the sound of a continent whispering, "Enough." For the first time, Ghana and Burkina Faso refused to sign another loan, refused to chase another promise from the IMF, and instead began designing a future that doesn't need rescuing. It wasn't rebellion, it was correction, because what they discovered is something the world was never ready to hear. That Africa's weakness was never its poverty, it was its dependency, and when that dependency breaks, who loses control? This is the story the cameras missed, of two neighbors turning their borders into bridges, of an economy built not by investors, but by conviction. A story that may decide whether Africa finally becomes the author of its own destiny, or remains a character in someone else's script. But before you understand why Ghana and Burkina dared to defy the IMF, you need to know what forced them to do it. Because the real story doesn't begin in 2025. It begins with a trap built decades ago. When the world talks about help, Africa always listens. Because for decades, that word came wrapped in smiles, flags, and funds. Loans, grants, programs, and all promising growth. But hidden between those kind words was a quiet condition: control. Every time the IMF or World Bank landed in Accra or Ouagadougou, they didn't just bring money, they brought rules. Rules about what to grow, what to sell, who to trade with, and even what to dream of. In the name of development, Africa's economies were taught to export what they had and import what they needed. Cotton went out. Medicine came in. Gold went out. Processed goods came in. Profit always left on someone else's ship. To the outside world, it looked like partnership. But to those who lived inside it, it felt like a leash made of numbers and signatures. Each loan came with reforms. Got healthcare here, privatized there, open markets, closed factories. And soon the very thing called help began to look like a slow-motion theft. Every plan to fix Africa's economy came with the same fine print: your independence in exchange for our supervision. When Captain Ibrahim Traore read those conditions, he didn't see cooperation, he saw colonialism with a calculator. And when Ghana's young deputy minister, Samson Ayim, studied those same policies, he saw factories closing while imports doubled. Both men, though from different worlds, asked the same dangerous question: what if help isn't helping? That question alone was enough to make the global powers nervous, because the entire system depends on nations not asking it. The irony? Africa's debt was never just about money. It was about memory, a reminder of who's supposed to lead and who's supposed to follow. But in 2025, that memory began to fade. For the first time, two nations decided to test a forbidden idea: that maybe Africa doesn't need to borrow to build. So what did they do instead? When Ghana and Burkina Faso turned their backs on the IMF, what did they build in its place? The answer wasn't a protest. It was a plan, one so logical it felt revolutionary. The plan that could redraw Africa. When the IMF door closed, Ghana and Burkina Faso didn't look for a new lender. They looked for each other. Two flags, two languages, two economies built by foreign design, but one shared wound: dependency. So instead of another meeting with Western consultants, they met under the open sky of Paga, a border town where trade once flowed freely before colonization drew its lines. There, a radical idea took form. What if we turn this border into a bridge? The plan was simple but dangerous. They would merge resources, not currencies. Gold from Burkina Faso would back technology investments from Ghana. Energy from Ghana would power small industries in Burkina Faso, and both would trade without using the dollar. No IMF, no Western approval, just African math. The Paga Accord, as insiders later called it, outlined a vision to build an African development bank funded by mineral royalties, where every country contributes and every project returns profit to the continent. This wasn't about isolation. It was about equal conversation. For years, Africa had been taught that unity was symbolic, good for speeches, bad for spreadsheets. But Ghana and Burkina Faso proved otherwise. Within 6 months, border trade tripled. Small factories reopened, and for the first time, young Africans started seeing future in farming and production, not migration. But power never likes independence. Soon, media outlets began calling it risky. Foreign advisors warned of economic instability, and whispers spread of sanctions and security concerns. Yet the people didn't flinch. They had already seen what waiting brings. Because when a continent starts believing in itself, no headline can stop it, and no currency can price it, and no empire can predict it. The movement didn't need speeches, it needed proof. And proof was already spreading across Africa, quietly, like sunrise. The world thought it was just 2 countries breaking a rule. But what if it's the rule itself that's breaking? This is not just Ghana and Burkina Faso's story. This is Africa finally writing its own. The new chapter begins. Every revolution doesn't begin with a war. Some begin with a decision. No crowds shouting, no armies marching, just a quiet refusal to keep depending. Ghana and Burkina Faso didn't just reject a system. They reminded a continent that power was never lost. It was only borrowed. Today, across the Sahel, the streets whisper a new language. Not French, not English, but freedom. Young people who once waited for jobs are now creating them. Farmers who once sold for pennies are building cooperatives. And leaders who once followed now question every deal before signing it. This isn't anti-West. It's pro-Africa. It's the sound of a generation saying, we don't want pity, we want partnership. Because when Africa owns its resources, it owns its story. And when it owns its story, the world must listen. This is just the beginning, the end of dependency, and the dawn of destiny. If you believe Africa deserves to stand on its own feet, don't just scroll, share this story. Because the more people hear it, the harder it becomes to silence it. Africa's time has finally begun.